As we start progressing towards a world where all of our applications and our services are distributed, we're no longer hosting on one virtual machine, on one instance. We have parts of our system in one place, parts of our system in another place, maybe hosted on different services. But then we need to start thinking about how we understand what is happening in that system. What's happening from an observability perspective? How do we monitor that? What happens if there's a component which goes down? Or how do we know a component has gone down? How do we know there's not something in between with the routing that has caused an issue, perhaps? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today as we talk about application observability in a distributed world. So my name is Chris Reddington. I am a senior fast track for Azure engineer at Microsoft. And the fast track for Azure team, what we do is we help customers onboard onto the Azure platform every day. So we're a part of Azure engineering, and we, as I say, work with customers every single day, helping them on their journey as they migrate or move towards the cloud. So what I want to do today is just share some thoughts with you about some of the things that are important from a distributed world. When we think about the types of applications that people are now building, you need to think about how monitoring goes alongside that. So we'll talk about a few things related to Azure Monitor, application insights, and how we plan for that in a distributed world. I'm based in the Thames Valley area of the UK nearby Reading, and I'm working with a few of the folks from the Squared Up team on organising the Azure Thames Valley meetup group. So if you're nearby, or even if you're not nearby, right now we have to organise things remotely, of course, because of COVID-19. But if you're interested in hearing similar talks and joining some of our sessions, then check out meetup.com/Azure-Thames-Valley and you'll find more info there. So we're going to start off with this idea of a needle and a haystack. Hopefully you've all heard of the concept of need to find the needle in the haystack. And the reason that I say this is when you think about this in a distributed scenario, in a distributed system, it's less about where is the needle in the haystack, but which haystack do we first need to go and look in? Is it about the infrastructure logging? Is it about the application level logging? Is it about metrics or alerts? Or is it about our Windows logs or our IIS logs, for example? If we're seeing some issues with our infrastructure logs, how do we know there's really a problem? Is there in fact a problem? One of the common scenarios that I think of is having CPU running at 99% capacity, for example. Is that necessarily a problem? Or is that a right-sized system in the cloud because you're optimizing for your cloud spend? If you're getting a lot of exceptions from your application, as well as those CPU kind of throttling or limits being reached there, then yes, maybe there is a problem. So how do you start stitching some of those insights together, both from these different types of logs, metrics, and all these different pieces that you might find, all of this data, how do you stitch that together? Well, that is where a couple of services come in. We'll be talking about application insights primarily, but I first want to make sure everyone understands about Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor is really a suite of services that is available for you inside of Azure. And the idea is there are two main types of data sources that you can go and collect within Azure Monitor. You have metrics and you have logs. So metrics are typically values that describe the system at a particular point in time. Whereas logs contain different types of data. They're really about data organized with different sets of properties. So telemetry, for example, traces, performance data, all that can be combined together so that you can go and analyze the state of the system and certain events that are happening there. Now, as you can also see on that diagram, there are a number of different types of insights or ways to visualize. So Azure Monitor is really this platform that integrates well, not just with your typical infrastructure or application scenarios, but is thought of as this end-to-end holistic monitoring solution that you can go and use in Azure. Now, Application Insights really builds on top of that because Application Insights, the clue is in the name, is all about monitoring your applications. So think about things like your performance levels, think about things like availability and usage metrics. Some of the things we're going to look at, for example, are going to be how we can look at a distributed system. So different microservices hosted on different Azure components and how application insights can help us from that perspective. Now, I've mentioned that we're going to look at this from the Azure perspective, but application insights works just as well with on-premises applications as well. So everything that we look at, or most of the things that we look at, will be relevant for you in an on-premises scenario as well. Application Insights leverages some of the investments that have been done with Azure Monitor in terms of data analysis, the custom query language, for example, that you might be familiar with. And all of those same concepts around alerts, metrics, logs, workbooks, etc. And we'll do a quick recap in a moment there, just in terms of the demo. But ultimately, it also hooks into some of your DevOps processes as well. So for example, you could, if you're thinking about Azure DevOps or Azure Pipelines, if you want to be very metric-driven and data-driven in terms of your release cycles, you could go ahead, wire up Azure Pipelines and Azure DevOps to only release into an environment when a certain threshold of health is achieved in a system, for example. If the system is unhealthy, prevents that set of releases going forward. So again, Application Insights plays nicely in that whole development story and DevOps story there as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move across to the Azure Portal and start looking at some demos here. So we're going to look at a few different concepts here. The first of which is we're going to see how Application Insights fits into Azure Monitor. So as you can see on my screen here, I'm on my Azure dashboard, and I'm taking a look at one of the dashboards that has already been created here. You can see that actually these have a number of different graphs available already for me, some various metrics going on as well. And I've got this button to this Application Insights resource. So this is something that I've been able to create very quickly for me by using Application Insights, and I'll show you how in just a moment. But this dashboard is just a resource like any other Azure resource. We can go ahead and share it with other users, or we can go ahead and role-based access control it as well, so it's only available to a certain set of Azure users. Again, not specific to App Insights, just something that is available as part of Azure Monitor. So the way that I could go and create that was just by clicking this application dashboard item here, and it will go and create that dashboard for you. So we saw a few things on that dashboard. So if I just take a look here in this left-hand side of my blade, I've got this metrics section that we can go and look at. So let's take a look at that. You'll see in here that metrics are basically just numerical values that explain, the health of the system or different indicators that we might be interested on a per resource basis. So we're looking at this in the context of the particular App Insights resource that I'm looking at. I can look at log-based metrics. I can look at Application Insights standard metrics as well. And we're just going to go and take a look at, a certain set of metrics around my dependency calls. So you can see here earlier in the day, I was using the website that I'm using as the example here, and there were some dependency calls going on. But this doesn't tell me much. I might be interested in zooming in on that, seeing what's going on, or I might be interested in splitting those insights down and just taking a look at what the target was of those dependencies. And now I can see the particular dependencies that are being called by my application there at the bottom of the graph. I could even go pin that to my dashboard that we saw a little earlier, for example, and now that'll be part of that view, as we can see at the bottom here. There we go. Or what we could do as well, for example, is we could go ahead and create alerts based off those metrics as well. So if I just create that query once again here, or so that metric rather, and if we just split that up, there we go, you'll see we have this option to create a new alert rule at the top right of the screen. So we can go ahead, click in that, and we can set certain thresholds that we care about, what condition needs to be met to fire off that alert. And then we can go ahead and create these, or link it rather, to these action groups. And I'm just going to click through for now because I'm not going to create it, but I just want to show you the types of things you can do with these action groups. You can go and email certain Azure Resource Manager roles. So think about your role-based access controls there. You can go and do things like email, SMS, push notifications to the Azure app if you have that on your phone, for example, in your mobile device. And you can also do phone calls as well, voice. You can also do some other clever things like linking to automation runbooks, hooking up into Azure Functions or ITSM, Logic Apps, or various webhooks. So thinking about that automation rather than that manual user intervention. Now, of course, we've been focusing on the metrics, the alert side of things there. But one of the things we really care about is logs. And with application insights, if you've used Azure Monitor before, you'll be very familiar with some of the concepts and some of the features that come along with App Insights. So thinking about the Custo query language, it's all based around that, and some of the queries that you can go and make up here. So as an example, I might care about, let's say, the response time trend over the last 12 hours. We can see there we've got a healthy decreasing time there of the request duration time, for example. Now, that's all well and good, but I want to show you one other thing here about these logs for App Insights that you may not know about. If we just navigate down here to the properties section of App Insights, if I just click on the right item there, in the properties section, you'll see that I have associated this App Insights resource with a log analytics workspace. What that means is rather than my logs going to some separate space, for example, they are all going to a central log analytics workspace that I have defined. Why is that important? Why did I mention this? Well, this is something recent that has been introduced, that you can go ahead and have these workspace-based resources. And what that enables you to do is use some of the benefits that you get from Azure Monitor. So think about things like private link, customer managed keys, bring your own storage, faster data ingestion, for example, compared with the native in-app insights approach there as well. So there are a good number of reasons for you to go and use this workspace-based approach. One of which that I didn't just mention there is the fact, of course, you do have this central log analytics workspace, so you don't have to do cross workspace queries now. They're all in the same workspace, so you can query them from that one location, which is very nice. And then finally, now you can see I'm in this log analytics view instead. Of course, I still get metrics, still get logs, all of those things that we've been talking about. But we also get something called workbooks as well. So if we just navigate to Azure Monitor here and take a look at the workbook section, I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at this performance analysis view. And you'll see that I can select 3 different apps or 3 different app insights. I'm just going to select a few of these here. There we go. And we'll allow that to load up. And rather than the last hour, we'll go say the last 24 hours. And what you now see is this great view around this easy to follow, documented view of what my metrics are and what I'm looking at in terms of my system. And you can build these workbooks yourselves. This is just one that is out of the box and given to me by using App Insights. But imagine the power of being able to bring together some of those metrics from the infrastructure view, the application view, some of those queries and graphs, and bring them all into this one view. And we all know that it's not a case of if something is going to happen, but more of a case of when something is going to happen. So having this very easy to follow workbook, or as I consider it, a bit more like a playbook, you might encounter some issues at some point. And what you can do as part of that learning process and being able to make sure that doesn't happen again is create a workbook so that if there are issues, you can quickly identify and triage those issues by using a predefined workbook, which looks at certain logs, metrics, etc., that you know you've encountered in the past. So helps reduce that time to finding the error and finding the root cause of the issue. So that's all the core kind of pieces around Azure Monitor and how it relates to App Insights. So let's go ahead and take a look at how App Insights can enable us to go and live in this distributed world, right? That's really the point of what we've been talking about here. So if we just navigate back to the dashboard and take a look at our App Insights resource, one of the things that you may not be aware of is this feature in Application Insights called this application map. And when I click on this here, what this gives us is a nice view of some of the pieces that are, from logs and traces, etc., that have taken place across a certain period of time. So you can see right now I have my filter on the last hour. If I go ahead and change that to the last 24 hours, we'll see that there's some results that get generated here. We have this graph and it looks good. And this relates to the information that is held directly in this Application Insights resource. Now, the typical guidance that you get around App Insights resources is having an Application Insights resource per environment, per application. So what I've got here is an example of a set of microservices. It's a pet project that I work on in my spare time. And what you see here is the end-to-end view of my application telemetry for my front end. We don't see much more than that. We see what my front end is interacting with. So my front end is interacting with some kind of website over here, B2C logging over here, and some various dependencies down here as well as Azure Search. But one of the things you may have spotted in this UI is I have this big blue update map components. If I click on that, what it does is it stitches together the telemetry and those logs across different Application Insights resources that I have in my subscription here and that I have access to. So as you can see now, we have a very rich distributed view of my system. So if we just go ahead and just rebase for a moment, we will see that the front end that we're looking at is over here. There's the website that we saw a bit earlier and the B2C login page. We then have my API management resource and a set of APIs, these big three green circles here, which are talking back to a Cosmos DB. And of course, this particular function as well is talking to a Cosmos DB, as well as Azure Storage, as well as Azure Queues as well. So what we've got is this very nice, rich, distributed view of what's happening in my system. If we just zoom in ever so slightly here, just to make sure it's super clear, I can also see the number of calls that are happening in between those components. And I can also see the time that was taken for those calls to take place on an average perspective. Now we can see quite clearly here, there's a warning, there's a red flag saying that this particular call is taking 1.4 seconds. And, it looks like actually there's some failures happening there. So what I can start doing is actually using this graph and using this view to investigate what is going on here. So as I click that link, I can go ahead now and start investigating those failures with this blade that pops out on the right-hand side. It gives me then the telemetry across those different Application Insights resources on what's going on, what's happening. So I can start investigating that. I can see, okay, we had a 401. Let me go ahead and take a look at those particular set of logs. And what you'll see on this screen is we have a very nice, rich end-to-end view of what went on in the system. This is not all coming from my front-end Application Insights resource. Some of this is coming from the back end. Some of this is coming from the API management resource itself. So it's bringing together all of these distributed logs for us and these distributed insights and bringing it to us all in one end-to-end transaction view. So the way that App Insights does this is by using something called an operation ID. So think of that a bit like a correlation ID in that sense. And I've got Application Insights wired up to my Azure Functions, to my API management resource, and to my front-end JavaScript web app as well. So there are different ways that you can go ahead and instrument Application Insights. You can either do it using some kind of SDK, similar to how I've done it, I guess, with a package for my Vue.js website. I've also done it with Azure Functions without any code, using a codeless approach. And there are certain services in Azure that you can go ahead and do that with. certain frameworks or certain languages as well. And what that will mean is I don't need to instrument my code whatsoever. No code changes are needed. I can go and get some of the value from App Insights directly. But of course, if you want richer integration with App Insights and that end-to-end traceability and end-to-end ability to control, then you may need to go and make some code changes just to go and realize some of that value. So what you'll see now, of course, is I can start scrolling down this end-to-end transaction view. As I get down to the bottom, I can see here that actually this is where there's some issues. So I can go ahead, take a look in here, the request headers, and start debugging what's going on. And I've got these related items here. Show me timelines for this user. Show me the telemetry for this session. Show me what happened before and after. But ultimately, I can see that there was an unauthorized issue here. So clearly there's something wrong with that login workflow. And actually all that it was me as a user, I hadn't enabled my browser pop-ups for the B2C login to pop up and authenticate again. So it was a quick fix for me, but this might be a nice, easy way if we have users showing us or telling us that they may be encountering some issues, we can go ahead and get this end-to-end view across all of those components very easily there. And remember what I said about that operation ID? Well, as you can see, this is the operation ID at the very top that is stitched in between all of those different components and services that we have been going through here. So my front-end website, which is a single-page Vue.js website, then through my API management resource, then through to the search results there as well, for example, as well as then through my various APIs here into my B2C login, and that's where we then got the failure. So not only do we have insight into the failures, but we can also start investigating the performance as well. So for example, we'll start seeing a ranked view of the different calls that we're making on our dependencies. And we can see, for example, this /collection dependency is taking, or this call rather, is taking quite a lot of time. So if we just navigate through this, what we can see is that actually a lot of that time is spent in this Azure API management piece here, about 1.5 seconds compared to the rest of the transaction call. And I can explain exactly why that is. On the back end, I'm using Azure Functions in a serverless mode. So there is going to be a cold start time if those functions haven't been used in some time. So for me, actually, that is not a worry for me because that's kind of just an architectural design consideration as part of my system. But for someone who had compute always on, maybe that might be a little bit of a warning sign and they need to go investigate that further to understand what's going on. So then they can start clicking in, understanding what the user has done throughout that system there then as well. You can see there are various pieces I haven't actually configured of that end-to-end transaction yet, but there is a rich amount of information that you can get from application insights in terms of your end-to-end application. Okay, so that's the demo done. So let's just go ahead and do a quick recap of what we discussed during the demo. We first learned that application insights is absolutely a part of that wider Azure Monitor story. So if you think about those concepts like dashboards, metrics, alerts, workbooks, and logs, and those custo queries, we get all of those benefits with application insights and more. We look, for example, at the application map and the ability to do those end-to-end tracing through operation IDs, which is really that second point on the screen. Being able to go ahead and correlate across multiple distributed resources, this end-to-end view that looks like it's just one simple view all stitched together. So with that, that is really the end of the talk here. So just as a quick reminder, if you are local in the Azure Thames Valley area, or rather the Thames Valley area, I should say, if you are nearby and you want to get involved and come along to Azure Thames Valley, meetup.com/Azure-Thames-Valley. We'd love to have you there. And if you've liked the content, I also do some regular podcasts as well, cloudwithchris.com. So please go ahead, follow me, and subscribe if you're interested in hearing a little bit more. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead now to the Q&A. So thanks for your time, and thank you for listening in. Looking forward to the questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Are you on the line?
I am. Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. Awesome. Well, despite being quality, despite being subpar, the information in it was top notch.
Awesome.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. We do have a couple of questions here. Let me read them out for you. So the first one is, how does this compare with other APM tools? So say something like SCOM or App Dynamics.
Sure, yeah. So I guess there's going to be feature differences between any kind of tool that you look at, really. I think the thing for me that would be the differentiator between something like Azure Monitor and Log Analytics is that you have everything all in the same stack, right? So you, App Insights, Log Analytics, or Azure Monitor as a whole really builds upon Log Analytics, builds upon some of the dashboarding functionality, the alerts, the metrics, everything that we've seen there. So coming back to the analogy that I said in the video, I think it's that concept of the needle in the haystack and which needle do you need to go and look at. From several customers that I've worked with, I've seen many other people using things like SCOM, System Center, Datadog, New Relic, whatever kind of performance tools that you like there. But the challenges that I see them encounter is the fact that if they have an issue, they have to go from maybe one particular tool into another tool, and have to manually stitch that together. And when you're in that scenario where you've got this kind of live issue, the last thing you want to be doing is tripping up over yourselves on which bucket or which tool you need to go and look in and trying to stitch that together yourselves. You'd probably rather have something which can actually go and do that all for you. So I think that's where Azure Monitor really shines and brings together things like Log Analytics and Application Insights. So you have that end-to-end unified view. And I'd say if I were comparing the two, I think that would be the area for me where it brings a lot of value. Even for things like some of the Kubernetes side of things, for example, if you think about Azure Kubernetes Service, if you think about Prometheus and some of those other areas as well, there's some nice integrations there with Azure Monitor. So I think what it's really looking to do is become that almost management and monitoring plane to bring those various sources together. So that's where I would see it being valuable compared with maybe some of those other options, for example. So hopefully that gives some insight on where I see it fitting in at least.
Yeah, so yes, I really like that answer and I agree with you. Awesome. I guess the right tool for you depends on what your exact requirement is.
Absolutely, 100%. And there's no reason that any of the other kind of tools are a bad choice or a wrong choice at all. I think ultimately what you need to think about is the context of your organization as well, right? What are the skills? What are the areas that your team have worked with before? Have they worked with Azure Monitor and App Insights? Great. Have they worked with New Relic or other tools? Great. But ultimately, when it comes to that operational scenario and something's wrong, where do you want to go and focus? You don't want to focus on trying to paint and understand the picture. You just want to be able to remediate and get back live as quick as you can.
Of course. Awesome. The next one we have here is, are all the logs stored in spaces that rack up costs?
Are all the logs? So if you store your logs in App Insights or in Log Analytics, they are charged on a kind of per ingestion and per storage basis, yes. So I think it's per gigabyte ingested that you'll be charged for either of those options. But things like the metrics, for example, are just things that exist within Azure itself. So they're just kind of their part and parcel. You kind of get that. But the logs themselves, if you want to ingest logs from, say, your Kubernetes cluster or your virtual machines or whatever kind of platform you're running there, those logs themselves, when you ingest them into Log Analytics or App Insights, you get charged then the per gigabyte ingestion fee there. So this is where typically what you'll see as guidance from myself and kind of fellow engineers is be very thoughtful about what you actually want to go and collect and the problems you're trying to solve. So you don't want to go ahead and turn every single kind of logging option on just to be drowned in logs for two reasons. One, it's going to increase your cost very, very quickly if you do that. And number two, actually, do you even need all of that information? One of the things that we typically say when we work with customers onboarding them onto the platform is that, what are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do? Because otherwise what we see is they just get overwhelmed with so much data. They can't figure out what pieces of information they actually need to stitch together and try and build that view. So try and be almost persona-based or action-based in terms of what the challenges are that you're trying to solve for and what you're trying to achieve, and then start gradually building out and turning extra logging options on, I would say.
Right. Okay. So, but that also means that for the platform metric that Azure is already collecting, there is no extra charge.
Right. Yeah.
Perfect. The next one we have here is, so even this is the question even I was wondering about. So, can you actually share out the application map to non-Azure users?
Can you share the application?
Like, somewhere on a SharePoint website or?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't quite catch the middle bit.
Yeah, so the application map that you showed us,
yes,
can it be shared out to, say, like the application owner or the team who is using that application?
Gotcha. So they would need to have Azure access in some way. So one of the beauties of Azure is it has a very good role-based access control story. I'm not sure if you've seen it in any of the other talks so far. But there's a really, really great story around that in terms of least privilege. So if you wanted to give someone access just to the application insights resource, and you wanted to give them like reader access, for example, so they can't go and change anything, but they can consume from it, you could go and do that. But in terms of like embedding that elsewhere, I don't think that is a capability off the top of my head. Yeah, I don't think it is. So that would be something interesting to explore.
Okay. The last one here we have is, can you bring in the data from non-Azure sources like ITSM, I guess, like ServiceNow or any other tools?
So you can ingest from non-Azure sources in the sense of it's a virtual machine on premises, or it's a virtual machine in AWS or GCP in any other cloud. From a direct other source, I'd be interested in what you mean there. But as long as you can fire the logs out to Log Analytics or Application Insights in some way, you can do that. It's not just that the resources themselves have to live in Azure and it will only take Azure resources. It could become that kind of consolidated platform for your logging and your monitoring, for example. So not just limited to Azure resources, I would say.
Okay, I guess the question is more around like, so I have this application and I'm monitoring it with, Azure Monitor. And I'm getting some alerts out of that application, and then they're converted into incidents or problems, whatever in ITSM. Can I bring that data back in together, in a single pane of glass kind of thing?
I'm just trying to think through the couple of life cycle of what you're trying to do there, because you would be able to, one of the things you can do with alerts that I mentioned in the video there a bit earlier is if an alert gets fired, you can trigger sending something to an ITSM tool. So if you did want to send to something like ServiceNow as a result of an alert, you could do that. I'm just trying to understand the path back and what you're trying to achieve there and bring back in. Or is it the one way?
No, so say I have an incident open in one of the components of my application, right? So it's a virtual machine that I'm running my application on.
Yep.
And it is running low on CPU, let's say, and then it has created an incident in ServiceNow. Now, I want to be able to see if there are any active incidents currently active on this application, on say maybe on a dashboard or maybe in logs?
Gotcha. You could, I think there's something that you could do potentially with Azure Sentinel, but off the top of my head, not directly in Azure Monitor, unless you somehow brought those in as separate logs, for example, and did something that way. It might need a little bit of custom tweaking in that scenario, potentially.
Right. Okay. Cool. I think those are all the questions.
Sure.
Yeah, so unless you have anything else to discuss, I guess we can just call it a day.
No, other than to say, I think the App Insights log analytics, as I kind of mentioned in one of the answers earlier, are a great combination, right? When you think about that needle in a haystack, for me, I think that's one of the things that I see as a lot of challenges with customers who are moving into cloud, in any cloud, not just Azure. You're building across distributed platforms now. You're kind of splitting apart that monolith and no longer on just that one set of servers or rack, for example, in a data center anymore. So to try and understand what's going on, you don't want to look in which haystack, or you don't want to figure out which haystack you have to look into. I think this is where tools like this shine, and regardless of which kind of technology you choose and decide to go down, making sure that you're able to understand and how you stitch that and bring that view together, I think is really going to be important to a successful deployment. So just making sure that you think about that overall picture rather than silos is really the message I'd like to leave everyone with here today.
Right, awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. So let's conclude this webinar. The recording of this webinar will be sent to you. We will make sure to include the original video as well as maybe also the recording of this webinar, just in case if you want to go over the question Q&A part again. So the next webinar will be on March 4th, and it is going to be about 8 easy steps to improve your security posture in Azure. And the presenter there is Martin Goet. So I hope, so that was going to be a live webinar. So there will be Martin actually, giving the demo live. So there shouldn't be a problem like we had today. Thanks again for joining, and I hope to see you in the next one.